practice. Yeah.
Rip It Up, Start Again. Really good to see you here this morning. I'm sorry it's early. People complain, but it's the beginning of the weekend, right? And we are disruptors, so that's what it's all about. So you all know that this is streamed live. We've got cameras in the back. Any questions you have, we will answer them at the end with a question and answer panel when all the speakers will come up and sit here and take your questions. And the Twitter feed, please tweet. Please do much social media as you possibly can to get that going for us. That's all the hashtags, etc. So what's Rip It Up, Start Again all about? Well, let me just start by I was in a situation, I've been in the creative industry for over 15 years, and I've been networking and helping agencies build and grow, and subsequently helping people come together and make things happen. And I've realised that the guys that really lead this are the disruptors. They're the entrepreneurs, they're the people that ask, why are we doing things in certain ways? Let's break the status quo, let's do it again, let's just do it differently. And I've spent a lot of time and energy to try and get people out of the rut and say, do it your way, okay? Your way is the right way, and make shit happen. And I realised with a very good friend of mine, a strategist, he turned around to me one day and he just said, look, Lulu, it's really simple. Humans are great at imagination. Let's celebrate that. We're great at communication and collaboration. But what we're really, really bad at is organisation, planning, and compliance. But hey, 10 years ago, I went, technology's here to open that up. It's here to assure that we can do all of that together if we just remember and focus on what we're really good at and let technology do the rest, and let's work together. And I was in the creative industry, like I said, and I saw the tech industry, and I said, let's just work together, let's just come together, because the creative industry, hearts and minds, brilliant engagement. Tech industry, there's nothing they can't do. They just need the vision, and they will make it happen. So let's work together. And this is what Rip It Up, Start Again is about. It's about bringing the community together. We're moving into building a platform where everybody can integrate, and we can bring the disruptors, which are normally quite isolated, to be honest, bring us all together and let us feed off each other and work together. So that's what it's about. It's a stage, it's going to be a platform, and the speakers are here to share their stories, to hopefully give you insights or make you brave to just start again. One of our very early speakers, which everybody now knows, Tom Blomfield of Monzo, you know, never been in banking, yes fintech, but never been in banking. And he just went, I'm sorry, the legacy banks are not doing what I need. I'm going to set up a bank. And you know the rest. What 3 words, you know, and these people that I met, I wanted them to have the stage. So that's what I'm trying to do. You know, again, speak to me, reach out to me, tell me who you know and who you don't know, and let's get people up on this stage, and let's get people happening. So today, we've got 4 amazing speakers. We've got Joe Scarborough from touchpaper.org. We've got Hayden Jones from Blockchain Hub. Victor Trocadouis, I can't pronounce, with Plum. Lucy Cassidy, Virtual Clinics. So 4 disruptors that I hope is going to make a huge difference, and I hope you leave here with an insight. Questions at the end, so the speakers are going to come up and speak and tell you about their story, 20 minutes or so, and then questions at the end. So I'd like to introduce first Joe. So Joe Scarborough from touchpaper.org. It's a not-for-profit. It's on a mission to make it much easier for startups and corporates to work together. It's best business practice. One of the hardest things I think I always find is, you know, there's the big companies who know really well what they're doing, but goodness, they're so envious on these agile startups, and they want them, they want a bit of them, but yet there's this, like, you know, disconnect, and it's so hard. So Joe's trying to help change that. So Joe, over to you, please. Thank you.
Morning, everybody. Sorry, I've got a bit of a cough, so you'll have to excuse me.
So as Lulu mentioned, touchpaper.org I set up, we launched last year, but I've been working on it for just over 2 years, really to help startups and corporates work together more effectively. There's a lot of differences between startups and corporates, as I'm sure you know, and that causes more problems than you would imagine for both sides. Yeah, we're a not-for-profit. The reason we're a not-for-profit is there are hundreds of agencies and companies and banks and insurance companies and creative agencies that will tell you they can plug you into startups. And some of them can, some of them do a really good job of it, and some of them don't do a very good job of it. It's just something that they think they might be able to do. The reason it's a not-for-profit is because then it's very demonstrable that it's an impartial organisation. And I've partnered deliberately with some companies and some organisations that fit very well with the mission. So whilst I was working at Tech City, Nesta released a report called Winning Together. This was a report that looked at how large organisations were working with startups, and it was more about the kind of what they were doing and the how they were doing it. But they did draw a few conclusions on some pitfalls that some of the companies may have fallen into, and advice from the likes of BMW and Telefonica that would help them or help other corporates work with startups better. But speaking to the researchers, they said to me, what do you think we could do further with the research? And I suggested that some kind of standard for interaction between large organisations and startups would be really useful. It would be useful to signal to startups that this organisation is not going to give you a 200-page standard vendor agreement when you engage them for a £5,000 trial. And it would be useful for corporates to know that this is not a 3-person startup that has never worked with a corporate before, doesn't actually have done the kind of building of the product yet. They're just very, very good at selling what they think would be a good idea. So yeah, it would help on both sides. That's not really what Nesta's role is, but they were supportive enough to come on as a founding member. And from there, as you can see, we had a law company, a huge system integrator with Tech City and Digital Catapult, a couple of kind of public sector or public sector funded organisations, Google, Grant Thornton, and Multiple, which is a strategy agency that helped me with the positioning. So you might be asking, excuse me, why? I think it's obvious why a corporate would like to work with a startup. They've got agility, they've got a level of creativity that might not be able to be achieved inside a corporate. And as you can see, Unilever, who have actually been working in this space for a number of years, I ran a project for them back in 2014. They did some research last year called the State of Innovation. It was very much brand focused, obviously that's their position, but they can see that there's a very clear movement for corporates to want to work with smaller organisations, and there's a very clear benefit for small organisations because, you know, if you have access to 1% of Unilever's customer base, that's a pretty good testing pool for whatever your idea is. However, it's hard. I put this slide up at a talk I did specifically to a small room, 10 people of corporate innovators, and they all got their phones out and took a picture because they were like, oh my God, this is my organisation. We really, really want to do it, but when it comes to execution, when it comes to actually taking a bit more risk than we used to, we find it very, very difficult. So yeah, this really kind of resonated. So how did I get here and why am I doing this? So I started my career at 17, pretty much straight out of school, in the oil industry. I joined as an accounts junior, just doing, we didn't even have PCs. I had like a dumb terminal. Yeah, it's like black and green, amazing. Yeah, ticking off invoices, doing all the kind of normal stuff. But they put me through my accountancy qualification, so I qualified in 2002, became assistant group accountant. That company got sold to a New York Stock Exchange listed company, so I hung around for a bit doing the integration, but it got pretty dull. So I left and I went into the motor racing industry. So I joined a company called Motorsport Vision. They owned a number of racing circuits around the country, one of which was Brands Hatch, which was where the office was, so that was great. There was cars and bikes racing around the track every day. Fascinating place to work. I found it quite a challenge in that this was when my kind of entrepreneurial side started to develop, and a lot of the processes and how the company was working I could see could be improved massively, and I wasn't really at the stage in my career where I could really help improve that. I tried, but it kind of fell on deaf ears and nothing really happened, so I stayed there for the kind of obligatory year and moved on. And then this was my first experience of a tech startup. So I joined Touch Clarity in 2006. They were a behavioural targeting company. They'd actually been working on it for 6 years when I joined them. We were just approaching a Series B. At the same time, we were just preparing for the Series B. We were approached to be bought by Omniture. Omniture are a big web analytics company based out in Utah. This was my first experience of working in an environment where everybody was pulling very strongly in the same direction. There was a real difference between the kind of corporate environment I've been working in previously to this company. And I was super excited by it. Unfortunately, we were bought. Another listed company, NASDAQ, so my team of one person in the finance department went up to 6 because we had to go through Sarbanes-Oxley and we had to get onto their system and we had to do quarterly reporting, none of which was a problem when we were a startup. It also got quite dull. Omniture went on to great success. They got acquired by Adobe in 2010 for 1.4 billion. They acquired us for 50 million, and I don't think much of that value was in what they sold to Adobe. A lot of our competitors caught up whilst they were kind of integrating us. So I went back to the oil industry, a particularly difficult time, 2008, global recession. But it was a trading company, and if anything drives, in this particular industry, if anything drives a good level of interactivity and profit is volatility. So we managed to scale the company from making about 1.5 million to 13.5 million in 4 years over the world's largest financial crisis, which was pretty good. It was an interesting company, kind of big, small, so 2.5 billion turnover, but tiny margins because trading. We opened offices in Brazil and Hong Kong and Australia, and we really kind of expanded the company. Again, it was part of a South African listed company this time, but I had a lot more input in how the company was run and what we were doing with the company and how we kind of structured it. So that was a really good kind of learning curve. And then, as symbolised by the torn page, I decided to rip it up. 2012, I'd really kind of had enough of the kind of big company politics and the compliance and everything else, and I just quit. I had no idea what I was going to do next. I didn't really want to be doing kind of hardcore accounting. It's pretty dull. For me anyway. I went to an event called Silicon Drinkabout. So those of you who don't know, Silicon Drinkabout was an event in London set up by Michael Acton Smith from Mind Candy. It was literally start-up people in the pub. That was it. It started off maybe 10 people. When I went, it was maybe 20. And today there are 30 chapters of Silicon Drinkabout from South America, North America, Europe. I think there was one in Dubai at one point. And the main ones run every single week, every Friday night. So a different location every week. And I went along and I met the guys that were running it. So Michael Acton Smith ran it for 3 months or so, and then the guys that would become the Three Beards took it over. And they were quite disruptive in themselves. They were going to events and deciding that paying £10 to sit on the floor, listen to a speaker and not really get any value other than that talking wasn't really the best way that an event could be done. With the event organisers sitting in the corner talking to themselves and not really helping kind of gel. So they decided to run their own events. They started the Digital Sizzle series, which was a barbecue, but it covered tech PR people, it covered designers, it covered developers and startups. So it brought together, much in the same way that this event does, it brought together a lot of different people. And we, at the end of 2012, I said to the guys, look, I need a job, because I was volunteering with them. I need a job, but I think what you've got here could be a business, so let's turn it into a business. So by that time we'd launched Don't Pitch Me Bro, which was a demoing event aimed at helping people move their product on, not aimed at helping them improve their pitch. I'd rather see a bad pitch for a really good product than a really good pitch for a bad product. So it was about getting the community to help each other. We grew that. We launched a job board in 2013. We were pretty disruptive. We were lucky enough to time it right that the startup scene in London was just boiling up again. I think the 4th anniversary of Silicon Drinkabout, we had 400 to 500 people on Silicon Roundabout in Old Street, where there's that magic roundabout kind of event space, and we hired the whole place out. It was amazing. So yeah, it went particularly well. But being a community organisation, it didn't really make a lot of money. The way we sustained it was doing corporate innovation work. So we ran hackathons for Lloyds Bank. We did our first internal hackathon. We worked with Unilever, Hasbro, Soho House and Yahoo. We ran hackathons in New York and a lot in London. We also did an advert for Air New Zealand, as you do. Lots of interesting things came our way because we didn't really have a very specific focus. Everybody knew us for different things. I met a guy one day who's, the job board was called Unicorn Hunt. And he said to me, oh, I know you do Drinkabout. I didn't know you did Unicorn Hunt as well. He said, what else do you do? I was like, oh, we do Don't Pitch For It. He said, is that you? Okay, so it was quite chaotic, as startups are. So all of that was quite kind of disruptive. I mean, for Chew the Fat, we had guests like Eric Ries, Guy Kawasaki, we had Rohan Silver at the first one, we've had VCs, we had the founders of Halo, we had a lot of really, really kind of interesting people. And at the same time as that, hence the kind of non-linear career anymore, I was a board director for Code Club, which is a charity that teaches children how to code. It started off being aimed at 9 to 11-year-olds. That grew so rapidly, it actually got merged with the Raspberry Pi Foundation. The Raspberry Pi is the small, extremely cheap computer that has sold 14 million units now. It's now the best-selling UK-built computer ever in history. Yeah, I'm also a member of the Raspberry Pi Foundation. I worked for Tech City as head of entrepreneur relations for a little while. And now I'm COO for a company called The Bot Platform. So we are a platform for creating Facebook Messenger and Facebook Workplace bots. So yeah, all pretty chaotic. I still do a little bit of work for Tech City as well on the visa program. So TouchPaper. TouchPaper was around about 2 years to 18 months, or 18 months, 2 years of research into a lot of what I'd already kind of experienced and what I know about how startups and corporates work together. So I've got, by this time, experience of startups, I've got experience of corporates, and I kind of have a reasonable amount of sympathy for why process and procedure exist in corporates. Like, it's absolutely necessary. You get to a certain level, there has to be rules, there has to be structure in order for the company to grow. But what they miss out on is when they apply the structure that they would normally use in their normal day-to-day business with innovation, everything falls apart. Because they want guarantees on outcomes, they want KPIs, and none of that really fits with innovation. The longest I've heard an engagement lasting is from day of first meeting to money in the bank for a startup, working with a particularly large technology organization, 4 years. If you don't have a 4 years of runway in the bank, that's going to be a problem. I mean, if you don't have probably 12 to 18 months in the bank from first engagement, that's probably going to be a problem, unless you work with some organizations. So there was an organization on the screen that we worked with that paid us before we had any contract in place. That's some pretty progressive thinking. There's also an organization on the screen that sent me 4 different legal contracts before one was even approaching appropriate for the type of business that we were doing. Yeah, there have been engagements in there which have been, hey, will you sponsor this event? It's £10,000. Yes, paid within 5 days. And there have been engagements on there that have taken weekly status updates and used up a huge amount of our time before we got to anywhere near being guaranteed any kind of income. So lots of different approaches by lots of different companies and lots of different reasons for engaging with startups. The number one reason probably 3 to 4 years ago was PR, which is an awful, awful reason, if it's your only reason to be doing innovation. Everyone wants an accelerator. Everybody wants an incubator. They want to be part of a co-working space. None of them actually know why. And that's really where TouchPaper started. So if you don't have a strategy for your innovation, then it is very likely you are not only going to be wasting your own time, but a lot of time of startups. I have a friend who works in a particularly large technology organization, and he said, I've stopped introducing startups to my company because they come in and Department 1 says, this is really interesting. You should meet my friend in Department 2. Department 2 meeting, 2 weeks later, you should meet my friend in Department 3. Oh, we need you to speak to these stakeholders. 7 meetings, nowhere nearer any kind of commercial discussion, let alone contract. And a lot of time can be wasted. And within the corporate, lots of meetings happen all the time. But if you're a startup, you haven't got time for 7 meetings. Unless you're on, you're on an enterprise kind of sales track and it's going to take 2 years. But the impact of that internally in the corporate is that they don't get what they want at the speed they want it. You know, the innovation, agile, yeah, let's do this, let's work with some startups. Or yeah, our onboarding for procurement is 3 months. That doesn't help them and it doesn't help the startup. So the strategy is really where everybody must kind of start. It's getting better. If you look at companies like Barclays, who were a launch partner of TouchPaper, they did a Techstars accelerator over in Whitechapel. As a result of that first engagement they changed procurement and they changed legal, specifically for working with startups, because from their first experience, it didn't really flow very well. Deutsche Bank have just done a blog post on how they're approaching innovation, and while still appreciating the rules and regulations and the kind of the environment they sit in, they've developed a way of working with startups that not only helps the startup because it moves quicker, but it gives them some guarantees that the startup is in a position to work with them. So I've spoken to some corporates that are like, you know, if you want to work with us and you're a startup, if you don't have a data and privacy policy, I'm not even going to meet you, because you're not at an advanced level. Now, I think if that startup has something you really want, in my opinion, you have a responsibility to tell them why that's important and help them execute that, primarily because it's in your interest. Because if you get to them at such an early stage that no one else knows about them, then that's going to be a massive advantage for your business. But if they want to put a filter on the front that says, we're not going to engage with you unless you have this, then that's fine. But I'd like them to be a bit more collaborative and helpful. Communication for startups is fairly easy. It tends to be quite direct. Time is short. But for corporates, not only is the communication with the startup potentially difficult, because there's different languages, there's different speed, and there's different terminology used, but they also have a massive communication problem internally. In the case where I said I was sent 4 contracts, it was very clear that our stakeholder that had signed off the project already hadn't really engaged with legal in a way that explained to legal what the contract actually was. We're a SaaS service, and the last contract I got was their SaaS contract. So what had happened internally with their communication that they didn't send us the SaaS contract in the first place? So there's a lot of barriers internally with large organizations, and unless there is top-down involvement and top-down support for a lot of the projects, that's often where you find that kind of middle management and the support services, they don't really understand the innovation agenda. It's not really a priority for them. Quite often, they'll be asked things that are outside of the standard terms. So, oh yeah, we pay on 90 days. That doesn't work so well for a startup. But if you go to procurement and say, we need to pay these guys on 30 days, they want some really good reasons why that's going to happen. So if there's not this kind of top-down imperative for this innovation project, then they're going to find it really hard to move some of those procedures. But if everybody just took a breath and stepped back, which is what I hope TouchPaper encourages them to do, they would see that the processes they have in place for their normal vendor and their normal interactions are slowing them down. They want to move quickly, they want to innovate, but they're hampering themselves by the processes they have. And in some cases where they get a few disruptors inside corporates, everybody's working around their risk model in order to facilitate the innovation. So in some cases we got paid by check because our stakeholder could pay us in 5 days that way. If they put us through the whole PO procurement system, it would take months to get paid. So, I mean, in one case, we got paid 6 months after we delivered an event. It's ridiculous. But in that way, you've got people working outside of the risk systems because they're walking in with a bit of paper that a director can sign. Right? They're working around those systems. So would you rather than be working around your systems and it not be catered for by your risk profiling, or would you rather change your risk profiling and actually know what's going on in that department? So there's a lot of challenges within large organizations. From a speed perspective, you've got the whole being shipped around different departments, but then you've got, once you've decided to go ahead with a trial, you've got the decision making further up the tree. So the stakeholders might have said yes, but you might not get a signed contract for 2 to 3 months. And that's a problem. That's a risk for a startup. The large organization doesn't care, really. You know, it can occasionally go wrong. You know, you can deliver something and it just doesn't get the approval it needs further up the chain. And then, as I've kind of alluded to, procurement and legal is it's a big area where it can cause a lot of back and forth, and particularly with my role at the bot platform, we're an enterprise kind of platform. I work with a lot of corporates, and some of them really get it. They're like, yep, we understand that your sales contract is the best thing for us to use because it's specifically tailored to your product. But then some of them just go, here's our vendor contract. And I end up taking out a whole bunch of their clauses in a sub-clause because they want their standard agreement. It's madness. But they won't work in any other way. They're wholly inflexible. But we did have one recently. They sent it out to their external lawyers. They redlined 50% of our contract. And I sent it back and I just said, I don't have the resources. For a contract this size, I don't have the resources to look at this. Like, there's a reason that all those clauses exist. If you have a material problem with any of them, let me know and we can work around them, but I'm not accepting 50%. So there's an education on the startup side to actually know when to push back and when, and it's surprising how much kind of leeway you can get if you just ask the question. And no one's really going to say, oh, hang on, you want to be paid on 14 days instead of 90? We're definitely not working with you. They're not going to bin the contract because you asked the question. So there's actually education on the startup side and not feeling like that kind of small fish in a very, very large pond, and you can't say anything because you might jeopardize this one contract. And that's really what it's there. There is no plan. Touch paper is not step 1, do this, step 2, do this, because every situation is different. But what touch paper does do is give you a lot of areas that you need to think about. Have you thought about the strategy? Have you thought about what happens when the trial goes well and you want to roll into a full contract with that organization? What happens then? Is there a process in place? Because if there's not, you might have a very, very successful 2-month trial and then nothing for 6 months. So it gives you the prompt to think about all of the areas that you may not have considered, and that goes on the corporate side as well as the startup. So there we go. So what's the future of touch paper? So as I alluded to with the conversation with Nesta, I think it would be really useful for there to be a standard for engagement. That is a particularly difficult thing to do. The foundations are laid with the toolkit that is online. So if you go to touchpaper.org, you will need to sign up because there's no payment. I need some kind of value. I need to be able to reach out to everyone that gets involved. But you will have access to 5 papers on the topics you just saw for corporates and 5 papers on startups. And they're all between 3 to 5 pages long. No one has the time or the desire to read 250 pages of research just to get out. So I've tried to distill it as much as I can. The aim for the future is to distill that even further into a standard and then be able to issue kite marks against that standard. It's kind of a lofty ambition. It's basically building an industry body, and the future will hold whether I can achieve that or not. But change is happening. There are organizations that are changing how they work. There are a lot of organizations that are very supportive of what I'm doing, as you saw from the launch members and the founding members. So yeah, I hope we can get there, and I hope that is useful. And we'll be taking questions on the panel.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So our next speaker is Hayden Jones. He founded Blockchain Hub. He'll tell you about that. He's got over 20 years actually having been called to the bar.
That's the law bar, not the drinking bar.
Commercial, operational, technical, investment banks, USB, Deutsche Bank, the Bank of England, fairly central bank that we know about, AT Kearney, and a global technology company, Fujitsu. So a huge amount of operational knowledge across sort of fintech as it is, and and Hayden basically started that Blockchain Hub. He'll tell you why, but it was fundamentally to help consult, promote, and support the understanding of blockchain. So I'll hand over to you.
Great stuff. Thank you, Lily. So I think by far the best gig of the year so far.
Yay!
Yeah, and I'm sure it will be the best gig of the year because we're only January, which is absolutely brilliant. So it's great to be here. Just a quick question. Anybody heard of an initial coin offering? Okay, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. Okay, so We're going to work our way through that. Anybody got any Bitcoin? Fantastic, okay. Anybody got anything other than Bitcoin? Great, okay, so that's a reasonably warm audience that I'm talking to, unlike some of the other more conservative audiences that I have had to deal with in the last 12 months. So let me tell you a bit about myself, because that's important. I'll give you some context, and it will explain some of my irrational passion for this topic. And also, I mean, it's fascinating listening to Joe as well, because some of the things that I'm going to touch on really challenge many of the norms that you actually see in normal organisations. So let me just tell you something about why rip it up and start again is in my genes, right? As a kid, I was always taking things apart. I was obsessed with taking things apart and obsessed with building things and putting. And what was so fascinating about that whole process was that you would build something, and you would kind of get to a point where actually it's working, but it's rubbish. And actually, what we've got to do is take it all apart again, and then rebuild it in a completely different way. Okay? And you do that time and time again until eventually you actually come up with something that really, really works. And actually, this is what Dyson did with the Hoover, because the iterations that he went through as part of the Dyson Hoover reflects that whole process. So, you know, don't be afraid to sort of build something and then take it apart, start again. So just to touch on, so my background, I'm an engineer, so I did electronics at Manchester University, sponsored by the Ministry of Defence, so I did some cryptography at the MOD. Worked at the MOD for about a year or so, and then I left and then qualified as a barrister. So spent a bit of time at the bar, and then went on to investment banking. So I worked through Swiss Bank Corporation, NatWest Bankers Trust, and Deutsche Bank, and then worked in Treasury, FX, equities, cash management, and business management. Left consulting for 5 years with A.T. Kearney, as Lulu said, and then worked for the Bank of England. So I worked for the Bank of England for 5 years, which was the most interesting place I've ever worked, right? I had the privilege of working for Andrew Bailey. So Andrew's now, Andrew now runs the Financial Conduct Authority, and Andrew hired me to do an ops and tech strategy for the bank. So for me, it was that kind of final piece in the jigsaw in terms of how money works, how money is moved from one organisation to another. So left the bank and then joined Fujitsu, worked in Fujitsu for 4 years, and I used to run big accounts. So I ran the post office, I ran BBC and Vodafone. And I'm a self-confessed disruptor, okay? Okay? And that's a very difficult thing to say. And actually, as you grow up, right, in life, that realization is difficult. And I think you either do one of two things. You either suppress it and you're unhappy, or you kind of embrace it and you end up working for nothing for 12 months, right? And sort of getting up every day and thinking, why the hell am I doing this, right? But believe me, having worked, you know, for 20 or so years in regulated, highly structured, highly governed, normal, conventional organizations where people come in every day and they write emails and do spreadsheets, doing what I do now is so much better, okay? So I'm a self-confessed disruptor. People understand that. They hire me because I challenge the status quo, and that's what I've done in every organization I've worked in. I've always challenged the status quo. And that's difficult. That's fundamentally difficult. But it has to be done, and I think it has to be done for the benefit of the economy more generally and society. So, my story: I bought Bitcoin at $95, right? I didn't buy enough of it, okay, but I bought enough to help me understand it. Any gains will be declared, so I will declare any gains that I do make. No, I bought Bitcoin at $95. I started hearing about Bitcoin about 5 years ago, and I thought, well, we need to get into this because this is allegedly money. So I bought Bitcoin at $95, and this was at the time of the first all-time high, and it went up to, I think it went up to $1,100 by December of that year. So I think it was December 4th, 14, 15 or thereabouts. And I was sat on a large amount of dollars, and I thought, what the hell is this stuff? You know, and I'm sort of saying we had friends over at Christmas, and I was talking about this Bitcoin thing, and it drove my wife completely mad, okay? I mean, my son, even now, he refers to it, Daddy's Bitcoin blah, blah, right? That's what they talk about, okay? So Christmas that year, I'm saying to people, this Bitcoin thing, what the hell is it? And I'm saying, it's not real money, is it? It's not real money. It doesn't work like real money. And they were like, fine, whatever, you know, just kind of do whatever you want to do. And so what I thought, well, let's keep going. So we bought some Bitcoin miners, and I mined Bitcoin in our grade 2 listed building in Islington, which was very entertaining. So I learned more about mining, learned more about blockchain. And then about 2 years ago, kind of came to a point I realized, actually, this stuff is really important, okay? And I've got some slides which I'll share with you in a minute, but in fact, this stuff is groundbreaking in its importance, all right? I was frustrated with my roles, you know, and I typically get frustrated after about 3 or 4 years, and I was looking for a way through that, and I thought, I'm going to go and do something which will do a number of things. One, it will help other people understand about this technology and its importance. 2, it will help apply this technology within organizations. And then 3, it will help blockchain companies actually sell it into organizations. So I set up Blockchain Hub to do that those exact 3 things, so education, strategy, and supporting of sales. Now, as part of that journey, I mean, the thing, I've always been aware of, you know, coins, tokens, digital currency, and I started to understand actually you can use these as basically like an IPO framework. So at its most advanced level, you can use them to raise capital for organizations. And this is a place that we have now, as an organization, started to play in. I will share some points on this more specifically, but it's massively exciting. In terms of its risk profile, it is at the high end. Okay, it's like building a space shuttle in your back garden, right? So there are lots of regulatory issues still that need to be clarified, lots of accounting issues that still need to be clarified. But what's so interesting is that they deliver things that other projects, other frameworks cannot deliver, and that's what's so interesting about it. So let's work through this. Let's do that. Right, just quick, any lawyers in the room? We got any lawyers? Okay, lovely. Okay, can we just put them, make sure they're all located in some way? So we've got the lawyers. Any accountants? We've got an accountant. Well, you're okay. You're a converted accountant. Fantastic, good. So let's I've introduced myself. Any regulators? Any central bankers? Okay, good, all right. Any people from HMRC? It's all been recorded, so it's absolutely fine. So I'm going to talk about blockchain and digital currencies briefly, run through that, and then talk about the relevance in the context of commercial transactions, which I'm going to touch on some of the stuff that Joe talked about, which I think is very interesting, and then talk about how we get from Bitcoin to capital raising, and then talk about how you can actually make an initial coin offering real and actually use it for a real purpose. So it all starts with Bitcoin. January 2009, the first Bitcoin block was mined. January 3rd, 2009 to be precise. Bitcoin evolved from 20 years of research into cryptography, okay? So it wasn't a sort of a fly-by-night bunch of hackers that got together and just cooked it up. The interesting thing about Bitcoin is that it's based on 2 core pieces of cryptography, one invented by GCHQ, so that's the UK spy agency in Cheltenham, and the other invented by the NSA, so National Security Agency over in the US. So it's based on government-derived cryptography, okay? Key point to remember that, right? What is fundamentally clever about Bitcoin? It's a form of payment, it's a store of value, it has a ledger, a general ledger attached to it, and you can apply conditionality to it, okay? So if we look at this slide here, so it's a store of value, as in money, it's a ledger, it's a form of payment, and you can attach conditionality to it. Now this is really important because in any commercial transaction, the commercial transaction that, you know, I mean, Joe was talking about these commercial transactions there, you're bringing these 4 things together, okay? So what it gives you the ability to do is to automate, let me look at this here, it allows you to automate commercial transactions. Okay? And where we are here is manual pay settled. So the way a conventional commercial transaction works is that Joe and I will have a contract. It might take 6, 12 months to negotiate it, whatever. Eventually we get to the place where we're going to I'm going to do some work for Joe. Joe needs to pay me. I will record it on a general ledger. Joe will record it on a general ledger. And there's a store of value that will move from his bank account to my bank account, and it will go through a central bank. Okay? That's really clever. Okay? Now, if I can automate that, so if I can create an electronic version of that relationship whereby I'm agreeing to do something, and if provided those conditions are fulfilled, the payment will move automatically. It allows you to take friction out of that commercial relationship, because actually the payment in of itself does not add value, if you see what I mean. So obviously the exchange of the store of value is important, but the frictional cost of contracts and general ledgers, the central bank infrastructure, all the payment infrastructure, and all of the lever arch files, right, and all of the wonderful lawyers, okay, and all of the redlining and all of that time it takes to redline those contracts, I don't actually think it adds a huge amount of value, because a contract is just a vehicle for managing risk, okay, and it's a vehicle for managing known risks, and they shouldn't be up for debate. There's going to be some known unknown risks, and that's actually a question of probability. And there's going to be a load of unknown unknowns, and there's not a lot you can do about those, and that's why you have force majeure clauses in there. So it's just a risk management vehicle. And just more broadly, I mean, I think as soon as we move to that place, I think we can create better forms of contracts than the current form. But what I'm interested in is how we get from Bitcoin, right? So store of value payment, okay? From that, we end up in a place where people started cloning Bitcoins, okay? And then we get to a place where we have got platforms such as Ethereum, which allow store of value payment ledger, and they start to introduce this concept of smart contracts, right? So I'm then in a place where I can actually automate these commercial transactions, and that introduces this really interesting idea whereby what I can do is that if I can automatically govern commercial transactions, so conditionality, it allows me to take utility, so a service, and I think the simplest example is something like cloud services. It allows me to create a token which can be listed on an exchange that allows me to buy that service, right? Okay, and this is fundamentally important because we go from the basic principles of Bitcoin, and we have these clones, we have store of value payment ledger and conditionality, and then we get to a place there on the far left where I can create, I mean, there are tokens out there at the moment, and what they do, they're listed on an exchange, and you can buy them, and they give you access to things like cloud storage, okay? High performance compute, prediction markets, resourcing services, okay? Curated communities that are connecting people that have got certain skills with other people that need those skills. Creative services. So so the way Uber works is that they take the latent utility of people who want to drive cars, and they connect it to people that want to go in those cars, right? What these initial coin offering frameworks offer is take latent utility of a platform that is currently not being utilized, tokenize it, turn it into digital events, if you like, that allow people to buy them, and then you actually put them in a marketplace and you allow people to buy them. And they will compete, you see, because a market will become efficient and the better coins will rise to the top in terms of the price, the poorer coins will rise to the bottom, okay? So, so initial coin offering is cryptocurrency equivalent of an IPO. The company goes from private to public status by selling digital tokens to raise capital, which then allows them to create a framework to build that protocol. They're typically undertaken to raise funds, so you don't need to go to VC. So actually, all of the frictional cost, the hassle, the pain that you've got to go through, I mean, I stand here before you. We could very easily create an ICO project today from this room, right? We set up a website. There's a bunch of regulatory stuff, checks we'd probably have to go through, so a little bit of legal stuff. But actually, as a project, we can do it ourselves. Okay, so this is kitchen table capital raising. Because all of the technologies out there, it's all open source, you can do it, right? It gives you access to a global marketplace of capital because it's all based on the internet. How cool is that? And there's some governance structures that actually you should put around it, so growth structures to actually just give it some hygiene. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But they have been massively successful. We've got Gnosis, which is a prediction market. So what you've got there is a curated community of quants who sit in there, and they've created markets on things like the price of oil, the price of gold. And what they do is that you, a bit like TripAdvisor, you rate the effectiveness of their models. And the more successful models get a higher rating. But the way you access that community is by buying one of these tokens that might be listed on an exchange. And that gives you access to that community to actually use that data. So Gnosis raised $300 million, so it's about 11,500 Bitcoin, okay? And that was last year when Bitcoin was trading about $2,500, $3,000. So you just do the assumption, you realize how much they're actually sat on now. Matchpool's fascinating. If you've not come across Matchpool, have a look at it. That's curated communities of people that want to meet people, primarily dating, okay? But basically apply that whole concept to LinkedIn. The only people that benefit, I mean, headhunting, this is all about search and recruitment. The headhunters use their contacts on LinkedIn to get leads in terms of candidates, right? Matchpool allows you as an individual to curate your own community of candidates for a particular role. So it's disintermediating middle people, right? They raised $12 million, about 5,000 Bitcoin last year. And then you've got Humanic, and that's a biometric banking platform, okay? So they did about 5,000 Bitcoin, about $14 million last year, 21 days, okay? And what they're going for there is the underbanked in places like Asia and Africa as well. So very clever protocols. What's fascinating is that they can be devoid of any kind of legal structure whatsoever. Now that, for the lawyers, that's a really interesting question. How can you undertake a commercial venture without a legal entity? It has no legal body incorporation whatsoever. So Bitcoin doesn't have a legal entity. So if Bitcoin goes wrong, who do you sue? Isn't that a really interesting question? Okay. So there's a book that needs to be written on that at some point. Okay, which I got asked a question the other week, and it was a bunch of corporate finance guys who used to be at Deutsche Bank, and we were talking about an ICO with them. And they said to me, so where do the coins sit in the context of a traditional balance sheet? And I thought, well, the step before that is that you might not even have a legal entity, never mind a balance sheet. And we kind of worked through and said, well, maybe it's a form of goodwill. We didn't really answer the question, but we played around with it. But again, there's a book that needs to be written on sort of finance, accounting, legal structures for initial coin offerings, which I think is intellectually very interesting. It can be genuinely beneficial for everybody, right? I mean, the ability to bring communities together globally in a way that they benefit directly is incredibly powerful. So diversity is a strength. So bringing together a community of quants who work in Colombia, India, China, Nigeria, that's a great community of quants, right? Versus a group of quants in an investment bank, and all they can do is quanti stuff in that single investment bank, right? The bigger the community, the more diverse it is, the richer it is, the more exciting it is, okay? We are directly competing, the ICO directly competes against mainstream infrastructure on a massive scale. So, my former colleagues in Fujitsu, IBM, HP, they sell cloud data services, high performance compute, right? There's a coin out there called Golem. That's a high-performance compute token. And what it does, it leverages latent compute utility around the world globally, brings it all together, and it allows somebody with a laptop to render 3D graphics at their desk, right? Without the need for a $300 million data center, okay, that's packed with compute power. So this is and you know, the Golem guys, I think they raised about $50 million. I think that's, you know, what they're doing is challenging the status quo of these existing large incumbents in a massive way, it's you know, this will happen. I mean, in the same way Uber's been such a success, these coin protocols will begin to challenge these sort of norms that we've accepted for so long. I've talked about leveraging economies of scales there, and people need to be paid, okay? Because I mean, you know, there's lots of bright people, so you know, the opportunity to be incented to do these projects is material, but obviously it needs to be governed properly. So that's what's special about them. If we look at some of the volumes, I mean, 2017 was, it's slightly difficult to read there in terms of the size, but 2017 was a bumper year, okay, for ICOs. We go from 2014, we're running, in terms of monthly token sales, we're running at sort of 5, 10, 15-ish roughly per month. And then we get to the middle of 2017 and we're up at 40, 50 a month. Total amount raised is in the region of sort of $800–900 million. Okay, I think that will be a peak for the moment. I think we will struggle to see anything as big as that, because actually the market is now becoming more saturated and there's a lot more projects out there. So I think the volume will probably increase much more, but the net raise will be lower. So we'll probably, I mean, some of the numbers I've quoted there were enormous, and I think what we'll do is we'll see a lot more projects, but we'll be ticking over at maybe $2, $3, $4, $5 million per raise. Let me do this. That's it. Come on. That's it. Yeah. Yeah. So last year, I think it was a turning point in terms of the, you know, this is a concept. What's now happening is that mainstream investors are becoming very interested in what we can do with these structures. What we're also seeing is that people are saying, you know, if I can raise, you know, if I can do 10 million, why can't I go for 50 million? So ambition is out there. So I think we'll see a bit more of that. I think that both the regulators, law firms are actually beginning to wake up and realise that these projects need help. So they're becoming more creative in terms of how we can support them. The public are becoming more aware. I mean, I haven't had my dad call me up and say, I'm going to buy some ICOs yet. He's got a little bit of Bitcoin. My godmother called me up the other week and said, this is going to be massive. This is going to be massive. There's a piece in the Daily Telegraph about it, which I thought was fantastic. So that's my Auntie Pat. You know, there's a wealth of startups in London that, and I mean, so yes, I had 3 ICO conversations yesterday, all of which were good projects. Really good projects, all of which I would desperately love to work on, and I've got to balance what they want to do. I mean, I'm highly selective about, you know, who we engage with, because you go from people you just would never work with to people who, yes, I can see what you're trying to do and I believe in it. Okay, so 2018, we're going to see more novel ICO projects. I mean, I love the start point for an ICO is concept. And then when you build out a white paper, I love reading white papers. I mean, it's the way to learn about them. I mean, some of these white papers are brilliant. If you're interested in this stuff, read some white papers, because it makes great reading when other people are watching television that's not particularly interesting. We need to see professionalisation. At the moment, a lot of mistakes have happened, but I think I'm very much in the space where I want to professionalise these initiatives. The regulators need to come out, okay? So the FSA, or rather the FCA last year, they provided, it was kind of sitting on the fence type guidance, which was, these are high risk, okay? You could lose everything, and if you're involved in one, you need to be conscious that, you know, we might come after you because it can be construed as a security, okay? That's not really particularly helpful. Whereas the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, they've produced a very useful 35-page guideline. If you're going to do ICOs, these are the steps you need to go through. But this isn't regulatory guidance. This is just a kind of a tick box to make sure that you don't mess up the project. And that actually helps these projects out and it helps the regulator out, okay, without actually formally defining anything. So I think we need to see a bit more from the regulators. The SEC have been have shown a bit more teeth on that. I think this year the market's going to exceed, the crypto market will exceed about $2 trillion. And we started last year at 20 billion. We ended the year about 800 billion. This year, I mean, we're going through a very bearish phase at the moment. But my expectation, I could easily see about 2 trillion by the end of this year. What we will see is law intersecting science, okay? Because I can create a smart contract that allows me to get paid for my travel expenses when I land in New York, okay? So I'll spend £2,500 on my ticket, recharge it to the company. When I land in New York, the smart contract sits there and it polls my phone for that GPS signal to say I've just changed geography, and I get refunded automatically. I can take that whole concept and I can apply it to a data center contract. So I have a contract to deliver data center services. Ambient temperature of the machine hall has got to be set at 18 degrees centigrade for 30 consecutive days. Smart contract sits there, it gets to the end of the month, and it says, yeah, it was delivered, automatically released payment. None of this 30-day nonsense, 60-day nonsense, 90-day nonsense, which I think is the biggest load of rubbish I've ever heard. Okay, so I used to run a procurement function. Okay, so I managed procurement for Deutsche Bank for Europe, and this payment term stuff is utter rubbish, because all the supplier does is to say, we're going to get paid late, so that means there's a funding cost. So what we'll do is we'll just increase the invoice to pay for our overdraft fees. So it doesn't work. So all you've got, so basically the supplier ends up being a bank to his customer. It's utter nonsense. And I've had this conversation with a large pharmaceutical company about three months ago. And this guy's made the point, says, well, we won't do business with you. And I said to him, listen, I sent you $100 million in bonds. Are you going to pay me immediately, or are you going to wait for 3 months to do that? He says, well, I said, well, no. I want you to pay me immediately, because I ain't going to do business with you, my friend. Very simple, okay? So smart contracts, this automation of commercial transactions, think about how much frictional cost it's going to take out of the economy. We'll also see, I think HMRC and the IRC will start to kind of focus very heavily in terms of some of the money that's been made by both organisations and individuals, because some of the numbers are quite astonishing. Just very briefly, what should happen in, do people get these slides? Or?
They can do.
Yeah, I mean, if anybody, I've got some cards, so if anybody wants these slides, they can, they're very happy to share them. Good ICO, you know, AML, KYC, absolute start point, you know, due diligence on the technology, who are you, transparency, you know, get some good lawyers involved, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What happens in an ICO? There are no plans. Nothing happens. Nobody does any work. It's chaos, right? Nobody understands we're going to cap the raise. There's no KYC. So they receive money from all over the world and nobody knows who it's come from. No security audit for the smart contract. They don't communicate, right? And the team, you know, they don't fit, they don't work together, all that kind of stuff. So that's what can happen in poorly structured ICOs. I think I'm just going to touch on this now. What's really interesting about the ICO project is that if I asked IBM to build me Bitcoin, they could never do it, right? And the reason they couldn't do it is because they work on tram tracks in terms of the way they build things. And this echoes some of the points that Joe made in terms of innovation. Structured, governed. The thing about ICO project, and the thing about Bitcoin most interestingly is that a group of people came together and they came up with Bitcoin and they figured it out. But they did it because they didn't have any conventional corporate governance sitting around them, right? And that's what's so clever about these projects, because these people are free thinkers. So what you have to do is it's almost create these sort of safety barriers around the team let them do whatever they want to do, okay? But work with them in a way that gives them security and allows them to interact effectively with the real world, okay? So they can have proper commercial relationships with marketing companies, digital agencies, all that kind of stuff. Because what you can do, you can kill an ICO very easily by turning up and doing lots of governance on it, right? What you want to do is govern some of the stuff on the periphery, which is important, but you don't want to over-govern the team. You want to just kind of let them get on with it, okay? I think I just skipped over this slide here, which, let's do, yeah, I mean, there's a regulatory point in here about whether they are securities. That's important, okay? As I said, it's a little bit of a grey area at the moment. Well, no, it needs to be worked through, but that's something that needs to be addressed in any project. So let's just, that's it. Let's go back. I told you the batteries were a bit. That's it. Yeah. So look, just a couple of closing recommendations, and so look, what I'm saying to you is go to these kind of meetups, these conferences on ICOs, because just go meet some of these people, understand how this all works. If you're ambitious, get involved in an ICO, okay, and start to understand how they operate. Study the stuff. There's loads of stuff on the internet. Just put ICO in Google and it'll bring it back. If you're really daring, and this is, I'm not regulated to give financial advice, and remember, the price of investments can go up as well as down, okay? You can invest, okay? And that's a really good way because it gives you skin in the game and you can actually understand what these projects are all about. Biggest piece of advice is ignore the skeptics, because there's a lot of sort of anti-Bitcoin, digital currency press out there. Blockchain is not so bad, but I don't actually believe people really understand what you can do with blockchain. And then we talk about distributed ledger technology, which I haven't got the first idea what relevance that has to normal organizations, because it's just, the term is very unhelpful. So that's my recommendation. I'll leave you with this final thought. We all remember Kodak, okay? And we all remember what happened to Kodak, okay? Kodak, last week, about 2 weeks ago, partnered with another company to issue a Kodak coin, right? And the idea, if you're a photographer, you want to protect your intellectual property within the image itself. I can tokenize an image, okay? So what Kodak are doing, there'll be a Kodak ICO, they're going to issue a coin, and they're going to take all that cryptography, they're going to apply it to imagery, and allow people to buy a token that's tradable, that securely encrypts the imagery associated with the work that you do as a photographer on a day-to-day basis, which I think is brilliant. And what's interesting about that, and I think, you know, Kodak, they can afford to take the risk. They've gone from, you know, I think their share price was about 2p or something like that, 3p. It went up, it's like 150% because they've done that. And what we're seeing there, mainstream companies, although it's obviously had some issues in the past, going into this space because they can see the opportunity that they've got. So thank you very much indeed. Happy to take questions in the panel. All right.
Thank you very, very much, Hayden. Fantastic. So a nice segue. Now I'd like to introduce to you Victor with Plum. And it's quite interesting because obviously Hayden's talking about investment and how everything is going to change the way we're looking at things. It's mind shift change, obviously. Kodak's a really interesting story that you brought up, because of course they missed the boat slightly on digital. Big mistake, even though they invented it. So they learnt from their mistakes and they're getting into the future. So Victor has identified a massive need in the market and has therefore created a company, Plum, to using technology automatically, chatbots, to make savings. So we don't have to worry about saving, and so then we can invest. I mean, what a great thing. Thank you very much, Victor.
Thank you. Cool. Hi, everyone. So yeah, I'm Victor from Plum. So quick poll. So who here saves money consistently? All right. A lot of people. And then who loves saving money? Good. All right, more people love saving money here than other places. But anyway, I'm going to tell you a story about myself and my business partner, Alex, two broke guys. So I started my career in banking, then went to TransferWise. I was one of the early employees there. And I was there until I was like in my early 30s. I'm still in my early 30s. And then I also met Alex, who was an engineer at Ticktail, another Cypriot. We were both in London. We started chatting and realized that we didn't really have any substantial savings. And we also realized that we didn't have any substantial way of putting money aside and managing our finances. We were like too busy, running around, etc., and didn't really pay attention to this. And then decided that that was a bit ridiculous because we were in our 30s, we haven't saved money in any substantial way, so we decided to design a little experiment to figure out how we could save money. And I did the traditional thing that probably the majority of you here do, which is putting money aside at the beginning of the month or at the end of the month, depending on how much you think you can put aside. And whereas Alex, being like a tech nerd, was downloading his bank statements onto his computer, checking his balances historically and trying to predict how much he could save on a consistent basis, and moving that money every 3-4 days so he wouldn't spend it. And the result after 3 months of experimenting was that Alex had actually saved 3 times more than myself. And then, so we decided there was something there and we should start thinking about it and build a business. And then we found out that this guy called Richard Thaler won a prize in economics about the power of nudge, which is basically enabling people to make decisions that make them better off in a consistent and like using behavioral insights to do that. So the objective of Plum is to make basically everybody better off by applying intelligence and this concept of the nudge. So we've created Plum, which is an intelligent personal assistant that uses AI to manage people's money the way they should, but can't be bothered to. Now, the problem is big. In Europe, 100 million people have less than 3 months in savings. 120 billion is overspent on bills. This means utility bills, loans, etc. And 97% of savings earn less than inflation. Just sit there and do nothing. So the solution is pretty simple that we've designed with Plum. You connect your bank account to Plum. We get all of this data. And we actually start saving money for you before you need to do anything about it. So the money's being saved. And these are the 3 pillars that we think are important. Savings sits in the middle, so we save money. Once you have savings, we then give you options to start investing and growing your money. We currently have one option which allows you to put money in a peer-to-peer lender that earns around 4%. You can withdraw your money when you want, and we're bringing more there. And then finally, we make sure that you don't get ripped off, right? So we see how much you're paying for your utility bill, your credit card bill, your loan, your insurance provider. And we think it's ridiculous that you overpay on these things because they're utilities. So we want to make sure that we switch you over to a better provider. So we launched, we started working on this project in April. We launched in October, and this kind of gives you a bit of a timeline. I'll run through it. So we started with Alex in April. In August, we raised £350,000. And then we had the first tester in the platform in October. Then the BBC ran an article that 16 million people had less than £100 in savings in the UK. We dropped them a line and said that we're thinking we're going to solve this problem with this technology. They wrote an article to us, and then people started knowing about us, which was great. And then we started hiring people. So then in January, we opened up our product. Last January, we opened up our product to the public so people could use it. And then since then, we've been evolving the product so people can save with goals. They can adjust their mood towards saving. They can now earn interest with rate sitters, I mentioned. And then there's a lot more coming. And then we raised some more money this summer. And one investment came from 500 startups, a US investor. So now we're a team of 14 somewhere here in Shoreditch. So the promise to our users in the next year is a lot of stuff I already mentioned, but like we're gonna bring more fair investments. We're gonna kill and eliminate overdrafts. We're gonna kill and eliminate expensive loans, insurance policies, and basically expand on a global basis. So that's Plum. So I thought I'd talk a bit more about the journey and the product. So just another 3 slides. So first I wanted to talk a bit about the benefits of being a chatbot, right? So Facebook opened up this technology to develop chatbots last April. And we were the first like Facebook chatbot that helped you actually save money and move money. And a lot of people ask us, why aren't you doing an app? An app is more interesting, more traditional, etc. And we have a reason why we're developing a chatbot, and we think there's like, for the right type of product, it's very interesting, right? The first reason it's interesting is not an app, so it's something new. But more fundamentally, you allow yourself to have a conversation with the user, right? Right now, that conversation is, let's say, quite basic. But as NLP evolves, you'll be able to chat to someone about their finances. And the whole idea of, being someone that helps people with their finances is to be able to have that conversation. It's like a two-way thing. Rather than me just showing you a bunch of data, like, hey, this is where you spent money on coffee last month. Hopefully, we can have a conversation with you and help you improve your financial well-being if you want to do that. More like, let's say, technical is like that it has very natural notifications, right? It's not another app where it's a little red thing at the bottom. It's just a message that comes into your feed where you're talking to your friends. So it feels very natural, and people enjoy talking to Plum, right? I mean, if you put emojis into Plum, Plum sends emojis back. So, and that leads me to think that it has character. So when you think of products, they don't have character, right? You've never really, well, you can say this website's kind of friendly, or this is kind of like clean Swedish design, but you don't really describe a product with character. And I think as these technologies evolve, products will start having character, and maybe that character adjusts to the character of the individual. So it's a very interesting thing to be able to have products with character. If you do a chatbot, you get the early adopter movement. Again, more like for people that might be thinking of building products, we haven't seen a problem with conversion. People, like, even though it's new, I don't know how many of you guys here have chatbots or use chatbots, people adopt it quite easily, and then support is very natural because it's you want to talk to someone for support, so you're talking to the chatbot anyway, so you can get the support. Cool. Now, I also thought I'd put something about money in the near future. I'm just throwing all these ideas out there, I guess. But so given my work at TransferWise, a few of these concepts of blockchain and removing friction from things, right? I believe the money of moving money locally and globally will come to zero, right? It's kind of happening slowly, but I believe as technology evolves and friction is removed from needing to, verify transactions, the cost of money will come down to zero, right? And then the second thing is that financial products are a utility. Me borrowing money, me getting a life insurance is a utility. And as a consequence, I think that should also go down, not to zero because there's a risk involved, but like all of the costs of like all of these like financial products we'll use will come down dramatically over the next few years because of technology. I think growing your money will grow in importance. There's not too much focus on that, but I think once your borrowing levels go down, I think a lot of focus will be on how can you grow your money because there's not enough like pension plans around, etc. So people will need to be able to grow their money. And I think that the future of how you manage your money will be something intelligent, hopefully like Plum, that helps you manage your money and does a lot of the stuff that you have to do manually for you, right? So thinking about what the best, again, loan provider is, etc., will happen in a much more intelligent way. And then there's a typo at the bottom of that slide. But anyway, so then on the journey, I thought I'd give you my 7 learnings of the last year. Trust is paramount. I think you got to be able to fully trust your employees. Otherwise, you don't move fast. Otherwise, you're second guessing. You're talking to them. You got to give them a lot of guidance. So trust is paramount. You're a small organization. You want to be surrounded by people that you don't even have to tell what to do. It just happens, right? I think a lot of founders worry to hire. You got one of my early investors told me, we were 2 of us, so the next person you hire, your productivity goes up by 33%, right? That's a pretty massive way to increase productivity. So hire early. So trust your gut. Like, you won't have perfect information. You can sit and try to gather information and talk to more people. You won't have perfect information. You got to go with your gut. And then it's all about the product, right? You got to build something that people like, and you got to focus on it. And for that, you need a good engineering team. And you might want to put structure around things, but it's impossible because your team keeps doubling every few months. So you can't put structure, but hire engineering team fast. Fear of embarrassment is probably the biggest thing that will slow you down. Like, oh my God, my product's not great. Oh, the colors are not great, or this is not great, etc. If you build something that people like, they will use it, right? It doesn't matter what it looks like, right? The sympathy for non-perfection in like early stage startups is pretty big. You will learn stuff about your users that you never expected. Like, we thought we were helping people save money. We realized a bunch of people that were using us had massive overdrafts. And we're like, you guys want to save money, you have overdrafts, you have loans, etc. You know, we didn't think that that would be a big component of what we were doing. And then keep executing, right? It'll feel like lonely, it'll feel like no one's noticing. And then one day, like I remember, like for me, I was like sitting at a dinner table with some friends, and some person came that I hadn't met before. She's like, what do you do? I'm like, I have this thing called Plum. She's like, oh, I use Plum, I save money with it. I'm like, wow, that's great. So appreciation will come. So yeah, that's more or less about me and Plum. I think I have one quote at the end which says, it doesn't go backwards. Oh, wait. So yeah, so people are irrational with their money, and that's why we think there's a role for us. And like even this Nobel Prize winner said that, you know, he'll spend his money as irrationally as possible. So yeah, cool. If you want to write to us, write to us. Thank you.
So much. Before I introduce Lucy, thank you so much, Victor. I just want to go back to this because it resonates for me massively. As a child, I've always been loud. I've always projected my voice really well, but that does not mean that I like centre stage. All of us, when we're younger, get put in boxes, and it's something that I hate. I detest it because you're making judgments about people, and judgments are false. I was always a disruptor. I was always breaking status quo, and this fear of embarrassment, you know, hit me all the time. But yet, every time I look back, I was right. And the guys that were trying to put me in this box were wrong. Your instinct, your gut instinct, is probably the biggest learning any startup, any group of people. Trust your instinct, because you know. What you know is not necessarily right for somebody else, doesn't matter. What is right for you, if you've identified a need like Plum clearly has, that is a need for some people. And it doesn't matter how big that sum is, it's a need for some people. So go ahead and do what you want to do. And if that's the biggest thing you take from Rip It Up today, then I'm really glad. Thank you very much for that, Victor. So next speaker, Lucy. Lucy Cassidy, Virtual Clinics. This is a phenomenal story I came across. I was so impressed. You know, we all know the NHS. It's massive. It's got more chairmen, it's got more directors, it's got more admin, it's got more of everything. And it's, you know, the hardest thing to navigate. And Lucy, from within, I think, at the time from within it, went, this is bonkers. This is completely bonkers. We've got a customer journey here that is losing us money left, right, and centre. Let's just change it. Let's disrupt it. And I think with a partner within, James Gibbs, they went, you know, I mean, this is kind of like a branding innovation journey, really, but she's not. She's a medical expert. She went, we're going to disrupt this and we're going to change it. And you know what? Within 3 years, she saved the NHS out of one clinic £3 million. I mean, this is brilliant. This is the beginning of the NHS maybe becoming a business. I mean, wow, wouldn't that be amazing? Like a business that makes money? This is amazing. So I can't be more pleased to introduce Lucy. I haven't really introduced your background, but you can do that, Lucy, to Rip It Up, Start Again, to share her story of what she's done moving forward. Thank you, Lucy.
Where is it? Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me here today. And it's really interesting, Lulu, you said that about people sort of putting you in boxes depending on what you are when you grow up. And I never really knew what I wanted to be at all. My dad was a doctor, and he said a physiotherapist. That sounds like a good job. I enjoyed studying, so I became a physiotherapist. But the whole time of being a physio, I was a bit like, well, this is quite easy. It's straightforward. It's very logical. How do we change this? How do we move outside that box? So I've always been interested in kind of self-development and changing things. And again, always asking that question, how can we do this better? This seems ridiculous. So I was a physiotherapist for 10 years, but I've recently just changed, and now I'm a digital transformation consultant. And that title excites me, okay? That actually resonates with me, whereas physio, I never really identified with being a physio, even though I managed to play that game for 10 years. As a physio, I wasn't reading physio textbooks. I was listening to audiobooks on how to transform things, how to win friends and influence people. If anyone hasn't read that book, it would be my top recommendation. I work in orthopedics, and if anyone's ever met an orthopod, they don't like to have their decisions changed or challenged, and that's what I'm doing on a daily basis. So that really gave me some key skill sets to move forwards. So whenever you think about transformation and things like that, someone talks about lean methodology. There's a plan, study, do cycle. Some type of picture like this will come up. But in the NHS, that is not what you get at all. Innovation has to come while you're doing your job. It's often in a hostile environment. You're trying to keep up with your patient caseload while also trying to have change. You've also got the added factor that there's no money in the NHS. Our digital technology is from the dark ages, and that some people are arguing that the NHS may not still exist. And I had a really interesting quote from actually an IT person within the NHS that stated that the NHS is using yesterday's technology tomorrow, but spending tomorrow's budget today. So that's the kind of environment that I'm trying to work in. But amazingly, I did manage to get somewhere. So each year, NHS Digital looks at the statistics of the number of patients who come in for outpatient appointments. And in the last year's report, it was 118 million patients. And at the top of that list was trauma and orthopedics, which happens to be my speciality. So I thought, this is crazy. Why are all these people coming into hospital for appointments? Equally, in about 2014, the NHS 5-year forward identified that unless we reshape care delivery, harness technology and drive down variations, then patients' changing needs will go unmet. And people who will be harmed, who should have been cured. And actually, I took this paper to go, this is crazy, we need to change what we're doing right away. Also, why orthopedics? Yes, we're the #1 of patients having appointments, but also we're humans, but we're also animals. And a simple injury, if a bone isn't pointing out your skin or facing the wrong way, it will get better. We just need to empower you with advice to be able to do that. We don't have to keep seeing you on many occasions. So for me, digital's always been quite exciting and thinking about how it makes your life easier. And I'm so excited about these smart contracts. I want to learn a lot more about those. But just think about in everyday shopping, it's smart, interactive. It tells you actually what you want in the end of the day. It's buying car insurance. Okay, it's simple. You can compare the market at the touch of the fingertip. The train line, my favourite. If you buy a ticket on the train line, you get an email to say, take your umbrella because it might be raining. It's a really helpful tip that it does, but it's all automated. No one has to actually spend time doing this. But now, think about the NHS and how we can compare. The NHS is still in the digital dark ages. We haven't changed our systems very much in the last 20 years, really. So if you have an appointment, you're sent a letter. And if that appointment comes on a day where you're at a funeral or a business meeting you can't attend, you have to phone up an 0300 number, sit on hold for 10 minutes to speak to somebody who has no understanding about your injury, who then says, well, I'm afraid it's your problem, you can't come to this appointment, and puts you to the bottom of the list. It doesn't make any sense, and if this was in business, it would not be still running. So the question that myself and James Gibbs asked in 2013 was the current model the most patient-focused, cost-effective, and evidence-based model? And I'm going to take you guys all back in time to when we started so that you can see if it was any of those things at that time. So yesterday you were playing football and you went over on your foot and broke a bone in your foot. You came to A&E and you were told, yep, you've got a broken bone, you were put in a plaster. You're then given an appointment to come and see the orthopedic specialist, maybe one day if you're lucky, maybe 10 days if you live in Poole, to come for your appointment. You arrive at the hospital, you see this lovely sign, whoever designed this sign, genius, car park full, waiting time about an hour. You queue around the hospital to get to the car park, which is situated nowhere near the department that you need to go to. So it's 80 stairs in Brighton between the car park and the fracture clinic. So you're in pain, you're on crutches, you've hopped down 80 stairs to get to an appointment that you think is really valuable. You have to be there, of course. And you arrive and see a waiting room much like this, with probably another lovely sign that says, clinic overrun, 60-minute wait. We even made the Argos that just the car park process took 90 minutes. So do you think if you've broken a bone in your foot, you really want to be going through all this rigmarole to come and see somebody? I don't think so. But amazingly, patients are really easy to please within the NHS, I think because the standards are so low. But 45% of patients took time off work to come to that appointment. And the question I didn't ask, that I wish I had, was did somebody else take time off work? Because you can't drive because you've got an injury. And 44% of patients were discharged on that first appointment. So I asked the question, what's the value of that appointment if you're going to be discharged anyway? But patients were really satisfied on the doctors, what they did in clinic. And they felt that they were listened to, that their results were explained, and they had opportunity to ask questions. But the thing for me is that only 44% of patients had an understanding of their rehab, of what to do next. So you'd seen a lovely orthopaedic doctor had said, you've broken a bone in your foot, come back in 6 weeks, here's your boot. That was kind of the limits of your appointment. So I kind of challenged that and said, well, actually, if we empower patients to be able to rehab themselves, why do we even need to see them? So why change? In the NHS, there's a big financial driver, obviously, to changing practice. Often there's a big push to see the right person at the right time in the right place. There's so many times when you get passed from pillar to post and it's not efficient for anybody. To reduce sickness on a national level, if you're not having to come to an appointment, you can be back at work earlier. From an organisational level, once you maybe had that first appointment, if you actually needed some physio, you'd then have to wait maybe another 5 weeks for your appointment, and it's just to reduce all of those knock-on effects. From a patient perspective, working in fracture clinic, I would see the same simple injury be managed in 5 different ways, depending on what day of the week it is and what doctor you saw. You might be in a plaster for 6 weeks, or you might be given nothing. It was a huge inconsistency, even just within one hospital, no doubt across the whole NHS. So ultimately, I would argue you were seeing the wrong person at the wrong time, and nothing was done. So our objectives that we set about to change was that we wanted to improve the patient experience. We wanted to put the patient right at the centre of the model, and that all management decisions were made by the highest level. So a consultant is seeing that your case on every single time, and that you receive standardised evidence-based practice. So your same injury can be treated in the same way, which is the highest quality. And also to reduce the number of appointments in terms of imaging, physiotherapy, and knock-on side effects from that side. So we just literally, as a physio, you said, like physio, no training in any of these types of methodology. We're like, okay, well, how is it now? That's not really working. How can we change it? So we thought, well, the first part where you go to A&E, we can't really change that bit. People are going to need to go to A&E to get their diagnosis. But the second half, we can radically change. So instead of coming to an appointment 1 to 10 days later, we were like, well, why don't we just review your case virtually? And if you need an appointment, we'll give you an appointment. But if you don't, we'll give you some advice and that you can manage that on your own. So we kind of changed it in this process flow. When I looked at the slide yesterday when I was preparing, I was like, this is just common sense. And if you worked in business, this is what you do. Basically, the first part is a manual, okay, a standard operating manual for A&E to go, this is how you treat this injury. But amazingly, it doesn't exist before we made this change. The next step is an electronic referral. So no paper, photocopying, scanning, faxing, got rid of all of that, just so that we can have an electronic referral in. The next process was that we just provided patients with information as what was happening. It was easy, it was a business card. And that every day we run a virtual triage of your case. So the orthopaedic consultant will be looking at your x-rays while you're still in bed. And then we provided you with online resources for your rehab. And interestingly, this was done with zero money because at the time we had no budget. Okay, so we didn't have anything to change any of this. So that's what we did with no investment. So I repeated the patient satisfaction questionnaire after we were running the system, and you can see we're still scoring really highly on how patients found this was effective. But now 85% of patients had a good understanding of their rehab. So it actually added a level of value to those patients. And our physios were actually scoring a little bit higher than the doctors who were sitting face-to-face in clinic by doing it over the telephone. So Lou talked about the NHS, and I wish it was 3 million, it's closer to 1, but that's for one site. But that's just 1 million in savings for just replacing a face-to-face appointment with a virtual. But what I can't calculate, and I wish I had an economist within the NHS that I could get friends with, is all of these other savings underneath the iceberg, because there's no more notes being tracked, there's no more secretary sitting there at the front desk, and there's no more fuel emissions, consultant time, physio referrals. There's so many things that are actual savings that I just find difficult to quantify. So bring you forward a little bit. And so I'd been running this service for a year. And the idea was to work smarter but not harder, but I was definitely working harder than everybody else. And I thought, this is brilliant, but I need to actually get some publicity behind this to support me to move forward in the next journey. Because I was doing it on free technology. I had an Excel spreadsheet, I had an online referral form, I was sending patients to SurveyMonkey to get their outcomes and using YouTube to give them their information. So I was like, well, it doesn't really join up in that sense. So I thought, how am I going to get some leverage to move forward? I work in a trust that has absolutely no money. And interestingly, I went to a talk who talked about the power of awards. And if you've not applied for any awards and you've got a gem of a solution, absolutely do it. I just did a blanket of 4 awards that I could find at the time, managed to win 3 of them. And the publicity that I got from those awards being written up in The Guardian and The Telegraph then meant we got a mentor from 3M. So I had a mentor from 3M, a black belt ninja lean methodology mentor, who was actually able to teach me some of the stuff that I should have done. Most of it I'd kind of done by mistake, but actually put some process flows into how we can move this forwards. But the biggest thing was how we could recreate what I've done in Brighton across the rest of the NHS. So through that process, I then got in touch with Microsoft, and Microsoft agreed to be our partner to develop the technology platform that we needed to support this to move forwards. So at the beginning of last year in Brighton, we developed a platform on Microsoft Dynamics, which allowed patients to be able to be managed end-to-end through this one solution. So it got to about summer of last year, and I was like, this is absolutely brilliant. How do we roll this out to the rest of the NHS? So I go to my chief exec and say, you know what we've been doing, it's wonderful, we've got all this support, how do we roll this out? Oh, well, we haven't really got a team or any finances to support you to do that. I don't see that happening. So I go to NHS Digital, I go to NHS England to say, look what we've done, you gave us these awards, how is the next step? How can I help more hospitals? Oh, well, it doesn't really work like that. Okay, great. So I'm trying from within the NHS to say, we've got a really good solution that saves you money. Can you support us to take it further? And I'm getting closed doors, but I don't like closed doors. So I'm like, right, okay, let's figure another way. And actually, a company came onto my radar who said, we love what you're doing and we see it could be beneficial to the whole of the NHS. Would you like to partner with us to take it forward? So originally I was reticent because I was like, oh, I'm an NHS person. Do I want to make the jump into the private sector? But I just thought, I'm not getting anywhere. I've peaked in where I can get. So I have joined partnership with a company called HBS. And it was a question for me whether to do it alone in the pure entrepreneurial spirit, or actually HBS brought so much to the deal in terms of they're already doing all of the selling into the NHS. So all of those pathways, those commercials, those contracts, all that stuff that I didn't know, it actually made good sense for me to partner with them. So we're creating Virtual Lucy because bots are usually females, and why not? It's a good name. Because so many hospitals said, can we clone you? Can you come and work here? Can you come and work here? And I was like, I don't want to work there. But actually, I can clone my knowledge, and I can create a solution that everyone can benefit from. So Lucy's the virtual version of me. And it's based again on Microsoft Dynamics, but we've actually done some really cool fun things because my new partner said, if you could redesign this and money wasn't an issue, what would you do? Which is always so exciting as an entrepreneur. You're like, okay, well, I could do this and this. So we've recreated it so that it's an end-to-end solution, but actually has interactive features as well. So it's still an online referral form, so you go to A&E and they refer you to us, but it's got loads of funky automations. Like if you're over 65, it tells you about osteoporosis management. If you've got certain injuries, it reminds A&E to check, have they tested this thing before they refer you? And instead of an Excel spreadsheet, I get excited by these things. I'm sure for most people here, this is kind of standard practice, this is what a CRM looks like. But it's really interesting. I've presented at a number of hospitals and I've talked about a CRM freely as if everybody in the room knows because I'm talking to executives and board members, but nobody ever knows what a CRM is. So just in case there's no one in the room, which I found, so a customer relationship management system. Do you not think that would be quite valuable in the NHS? You'd think so, but people don't know what I'm talking about, which has always amazed me. So a lovely platform for you to be able to manage your workflows. It does all your outcomes for you. It automatically sends your appointments on for booking and scheduling. And this is our app, Lucy, which is your rehab app. So say you've got that foot injury now. As soon as you've left A&E, you'll be referred to a consultant. And when the consultant has said, yeah, that's a toe fracture, it's pretty simple, we'll be able to push out a code for you to log in to start your rehab straight away. Your rehab will be delivered on your iPhone, on your watch, in any way that you want it, and it collects outcomes in how you're performing and things like that. We've also got high quality written information, and the key here is what I'm trying to do is disrupt that every single hospital wants to do it their own way. They think, oh no, we know better for that injury. But do you know better? Have you spent hours researching the current research for that specific injury? So we're challenging them to say, we have a set of protocols for these injuries that are evidence-based and signed off by the experts in that field. Do you not think that maybe you should be using those ways of moving forwards? So really disrupting the thinking in that level. So patients get their exercises, they can do little smiley faces and pain levels. And little things like, if for a pain score, if somebody gets a 10 out of 10 pain score, it just sends a little link to a physio to say, your patient's got 10 out of 10. Do you need to talk to them? Do you need to adjust their program? So you can actually interact with the patient on that level. There's a chat function, there's an interactive Skype function. This is just an example of one of the exercises, so you can kind of see the nice quality. It's not an NHS, oh no, I don't think I can. No, okay. So the videos are all really high quality, so you can see exactly what you're doing. I did wish they had some older, fatter models on some of the things though, because some of our patients, like, they don't really relate to this lovely, well-toned female on all the exercise videos. And the patient can see their outcomes. They can see how they're progressing with their rehab. They can see where their pain scores are and everything like that improving. And I can see that as the clinician as well. It does have an interactive telehealth selection. So if you're struggling with an exercise, you can say to the physio, can we have a little chat? So you can do that while you're out and about to save you having to come in again. And the statistics, so the NHS doesn't collect any, well, if it collects statistics, nobody has the time to analyse them. And if they do analyse them, it's 2 years later, so it doesn't actually affect the patient. But a CRM collects all this automatically, and this was my most exciting part, that I have a statistics dashboard that updates me in real time as to what's happening. If a patient fills in an outcome score at 6 weeks, and for that injury, I'd expect it to be higher, it can send me an alert to say, hey, your patient's not doing so well. It's not just a number on a dashboard at the end of 2 years, which has no value to the patient. Also, really simple things that you'd think this is standard, but in the NHS just doesn't happen. It's got automatically mail merged letters, so we can import all of your information from the CRM to the letter that goes to your GP. Whereas still in the NHS, doctors dictate letters that get sent to India. India type them up, but there's so many spelling errors, they come back to a UK secretary to overview it before it gets sent to your doctor, maybe 3 weeks after you've been into hospital. So the value of that, when mail merge has been around for donkey's years, but it's just never utilised, it astounds me. So other key features, it's got KPI dashboards. So the way we've set it up is so that hospitals across the country can see how they're performing for different injuries. So if someone is doing something different and they're doing really well in their outcomes, we can say, hey, what are you doing? Let's everybody learn from that experience, and that happens automatically. We can record missed injuries, we can do invoicing, all that sort of stuff, which in business is bread and butter, but with the NHS, it doesn't happen on an automatic basis. So my kind of key message with what I'm trying to achieve with virtual clinics, not just in orthopedics, but you can do it in so many different fields of medicine, is that we need to move away from expensive stick diagrams and costly one-to-one appointments and to harness digital technology to work on a one-to-many basis for actually a lot less of a cost. And it really is a win-win-win in this situation, because the patient wins because they get a consultant review, they get their diagnosis in 72 hours, they've got somebody to contact, they've got an open door policy, and less costs associated with travel, time off work. The NHS wins because they're saving a lot of money, less patients are going to hospital, and we're able to actually analyse our statistics. And the clinician wins because I'm seeing patients who need to see me. I'm not seeing a clinic full of toe fractures. I'm like, yes, you've broken your toe, it will heal in this many days, do this, don't do that. I get to see the challenging people who actually need to be there, and they don't sit there at the bottom of the waiting list. So everybody wins in that perspective. And I've also done a little top tips slide, because these are kind of some of the things I wished I'd known slightly early on in my journey. So challenges are like mountains. There's lots of ways to get to the top. Okay, if one door closes, do not get disheartened. Move around, try and find another way. Also, I've got a can-do attitude no matter what. No one can knock me down, really, not for very long, because actually just get back up and go, you know what, I can really do this. And this is my favourite, it's actually my husband's that I steal, is don't spend time with crabs and vampires. Has anybody heard this before? No, it's the most brilliant thing, okay? So does anyone know why crabs in a bucket cannot climb out the bucket? Exactly. So they have the ability, and if you have one crab in a bucket, he's out of there. But the other crabs pull him down as soon as he gets close to the top. And people around you are crabs, okay? Some worse than others. You're getting to the precipice of succeeding, and they don't want that because they're like, oh, okay, I'm not doing that. He's doing pretty well. I'm just going to pull you back down a little bit. So don't spend time with crabs. And everyone should know who vampires is. Have you ever gone to a meeting with someone full of enthusiasm and excitement and you come out drained? You're like, oh my word, I've had the life sucked out of me. Those are vampires. Just avoid crabs and vampires and you'll do a lot better. Find supportive champions in your stakeholders. I don't actually mind admitting that I didn't know what a stakeholder was until I had my 3M training in the physios and NHS. I didn't really need to know what that was. But actually knowing who they are and getting an exec sponsor right to the top really does help. Also, don't seek the opinion of everybody, okay? You'll get lost in confusion, you'll never get an answer, and everyone's got a different opinion, okay? Go to the top level of who you respect, okay, and who has that knowledge, and just go with that. Engagement with patient and clients, that's a bit of an obvious one. Looking outside the box, what are people doing in different areas? May not necessarily be the area you work in, but what skills can you use from other areas around? Don't be scared of asking for help, okay? I think a lot of the time, especially when you're in that early entrepreneur space, you're kind of thinking, I can't ask for help because if I tell someone my idea, then they'll know what I'm doing. You need to ask for help. Get the opinion of most people that you can do. And also, don't be scared to ask the cheeky request. I am one that's known for cheeky requests. So the Microsoft deal that I talked about, Microsoft paid for all the developments because I had the cheeky request. That was literally how that came. I was like, well, we haven't got any money, so we're going to bring the skill set to this deal. You can provide the rest. But nobody would have thought to do that if you didn't kind of put that cheeky request in. And again, stakeholders early in your planning. So Virtual Lucy is going to be a concept within health. It's not just going to be orthopedics, okay? It's going to be all sorts of things within health, within your gynecology department, within ophthalmology. We're looking at actually radically changing how outpatient services are run within the NHS with my partners. And that's kind of a little bit of how my brain works, and probably most people in the room.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to grab a sip of water.
So now we're going to switch to the question and answer session. But just before that, I just want to say a few thank yous. Really, really important. So Rip It Up, Start Again is supported by Runway East, who you obviously know a lot about. They're all around the room, who support and host this event. Amigo, amigo.co.uk is the production team that support the event. They stream it live for me. It's quite a complex business, but it's all in the mode of transparency and collaboration, because it's the only way. Lucy talks about ask for help. It's the only way that we're all going to help support each other moving forward in this quest for building civilizational wealth, which I've talked about in the past. We do have to ask for help. You have to be very careful who you're asking for help. You know, it's a bit what you said, Lucy. Don't ask everyone's opinion, but ask for help. And obviously some people are going to go, well, that's the same thing, isn't it? No, it's very clearly not. Follow the gut. Know what you're asking, and then you'll find who to ask. And that's all part of Rip It Up. So please go to the website, please tweet and support us, and join in, send your email, send it to friends so that we can build up this network together and move on. So the next one will be at the end of April, back here at Runway East. It's always the last Friday of the month. And I look forward to seeing you there. So if the speakers would like to come up, question and answers, please challenge as much as you like, as much as you dare, and we'll take some of the tweets from online as well.
Wow. Yeah.
Probably have to stand up now. Okay, Hannah, if, is Hannah around? You can do the microphone.
I like these.
So, is there any questions from the audience? Lady at the back.
Good morning. My name is Karen Morton. I'm a gynaecologist. You mentioned
perfect.
the word gynecology in the last bit of your speech. Of course, I work within the NHS and outside the NHS because I too am disrupting. I thank you very much for your contribution, which I enjoyed enormously. And of course, sadly, I recognise so many of the things that you said, but I find myself also feeling a bit like when I'm abroad and people start criticising the UK, I find myself being defensive about the NHS because there are other aspects of it, like training. Because if everything is conducted virtually, then you don't get any new doctors or physios or other people coming through being trained. But moving on, I agree entirely that it's ridiculous that people go to see doctors most of the time. It's a dreadful drain on everybody's resources. And the business that I have started is a medical helpline where people have access not only to GPs but to gynecologists. Everywhere else in Europe and the States, women would have their own gynecologist. And women take a third more time off work than men for health reasons. So I really support the virtual clinic and perhaps all the women around here who will recognise that they do have period problems or menopausal problems or whatever, and they could talk on the phone. So yes, you're right, medicine is the final frontier. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Could you pass the microphone forward to the gentleman just in front of you? Thank you very much.
Hi there. My question's for Victor from Plum. Sorry, a bit of echo. It was just a very quick question. I went to a talk a few months ago, and there was representatives from Moneybox and Money Dashboard. So, sorry, I don't know how to stop this. So similar premise to a certain extent, but one of the things that they discussed was around security and risk. So effectively giving you access to your bank account, and will the banks refund you if, for example, there's fraud on your account or anything like that? Have you guys done anything around that particular aspect?
So, yeah, it's basically been, let's say, a bit of banks used to have stuff in their terms and conditions that said, like, if you share your data, if something happens to your account, we might not refund you. But basically, there's been new regulation that came out, like, just the other week, like January 12th. That basically is like open banking, PSD2, which basically puts a framework around sharing your data with your banking data with anyone that's like regulated and can hold that data, and basically puts all of that to rest. Whether or not you're sharing your data, you're exposed as a customer. So now you're still covered if money goes missing from your account, even if you're sharing your data with Plum or Moneybox or whoever.
Just a quick question on that, because the only thing I was unsure about is it gives you, sorry, I don't have to stop it. It gives you access, as far as I understand, with the new regulation to see like people's trends or how they're spending money. But the thing with Money Dashboard, I'll speak out loud. The thing with Money Dashboard was that.
You have to speak into the mic because it's live.
Oh, was it? Okay, sorry. The thing with Money Dashboard was that you have to effectively give them your security code and access to your bank account via that, as opposed to a bank being able to track it.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. So basically, when you give your access code, right, it's read-only access that we get, so we can only see your transactions, so we can't move money. But what I'm saying is, as of January 12th, there's new regulation where those tokens the banks are giving you direct access to the data versus using this technology that we're using up until now, which is called scraping. Okay. So basically, I mean, fundamentally, there's nothing to really worry about because the banks are authorizing companies like ourselves to get that data, so there's full knowledge of who's accessing the data, and full like kind of what do you call it? Like they're approving that authorization.
Cool. Thank you.
In front of you, if you could pass the mic.
Hi, my name's Inkem Ekwakoma. I am a lawyer, but I'm also a disruptor. I was really interested in the points I think Joe you were making, because I've had to deal with working in a large corporate and having to deal with agile startups, it just totally becoming unstuck when it comes to things like finance, risk, all of those sorts of things. So I totally appreciate, and I'm 100% behind what you're doing. Hayden, the question I had for you was, you said get involved with an ICO, and I was just interested, how do you, because I'm very much interested in that.
You can talk to me. I mean, the power of networking, I think, is immense. My journey into this, I knew, 12 months ago, I knew a core of about maybe 20 or so people. I'm up to sort of 500-600 people in this space now in terms of my network. I mean, I can connect you. Are you in-house or are you with a law firm?
I'm with a disruptor company, so I work in-house, but via a firm that does things totally differently.
Yeah. Okay. So talk to me, and then I can put you in touch with either a lawyer. I mean, you can work with me. Work with other projects, because there's so much of this stuff's going to come through in time. But I think it's simplest.
Brilliant. Thank you. I will do.
All right.
If you can pass the mic to your left hand.
Thank you for that. I thought 4 really interesting and different sets of presentations, and I wonder whether each of you learnt something from the other 3 presentations, and if you could say what that might have been and what you might do differently.
So I was really interested in smart contracts, personally, just because I've gone through a process, and contracts within the NHS, I think, is even worse than potentially in other companies in terms of payments and procurement and the amount you have to go through in terms of legal contracts back and forth to make that agreement. So for me, I'm definitely going to put my boss in contact with yourself to learn more about the smart contracts and that sort of things.
Yeah, I mean, I guess for me, we've been thinking, and a bit the slide up on where money's going ties a lot to like public ledgers and stuff. So we're thinking in our context how we can make money go further for people that are saving by tying it. It's a bit vague what I'm saying, but like tying it to smart contracts. So we're thinking about how to implement that technology to democratize things around savings and credit as well. So it was interesting. I don't know too much about it, so it was good to hear a bit of that detail.
Yeah, so for me, I've, like Lucy, read a lot around kind of entrepreneurship, but there were a couple of books on there that I haven't read, so I should definitely be picking those up. I know a lot of people that would benefit from the kind of nudge psychology of Plum, so I'll be pushing them towards towards Plum. And then smart contracts, I think, Hayden and I have spoken about this stuff before, but definitely in the context of startup and corporate relationships and using those as a mechanism to standardise that behaviour would be great.
I think, for me, it kind of reinforces all of the presentations. Kind of reinforce the point, and I love this word. Or it's 2 words: immune system. Okay, and the thing is that these conventional organisations they have this immune system that works against change, right? And that's really difficult to deal with. And so, just 2 very interesting points. So my friend he's a director of surgery at Preston Royal Hospital. And I see him on a regular basis, and obviously he's very interested in what I do. I've known him for 30 years. He's a proper surgeon. And we talk about the stuff that he does, right? He was asked the other week, he said, he wants a consulting room built, and they're going to charge him £2 million for it. And I said, you can build 20 houses for that. I mean, how in, and he said, they just fight against it, you see. And and then the other thing, at the other end of the spectrum, you see, I saw a project this week, which is very similar to what Lucy was talking about, but it deals with radiology diagnostic, and it's called deep radiology. And the idea is what you do is you publish radiology, so X-rays and such like, into a community. And what they do, you've got AI that runs on top of it, that then analyzes the imagery, and then it creates an opinion or a diagnosis based on what that image is saying, and it's published back to the consultant or the doctor, the healthcare professional. That's a great use of technology, right? And these guys are doing an ICO, deep radiology, doing an ICO, and their way through navigating around that immune system is to just kind of set up an island, right, and just start throwing this stuff over there to see if they can challenge the status quo. So that idea, the idea of an immune system. So where is the immune system and how does it respond? I think for me, very much echoed in what other people said today.
Hi, my name is Ru. I'm a co-founder of a startup in the fitness space, and I have a question for Hayden. What do you think are the differences in the ICO space here in the UK compared to across the pond? And also, what do you think of the data that about 95% of ICOs got funded in July, and now in October it's about 35%? And what implications does that have?
So the second one I'll take first. As I said, I think what we saw at the back end of last year was a lot more regulatory, particularly in China, South Korea, in terms of, the Chinese basically banned cryptocurrency exchanges, okay? And a large part of the market is driven out of China. So I think that sent a big shudder through the marketplace, and I think that changed the profile. And as I said, I think it will shift in terms of, I think we'll see volume coming through, more volume coming through, but I think the size of the raises will get smaller. I think there's probably a window of 12 to 18 months before we actually get formal regulation in place in terms of how this is managed. I think Philip Hammond today over in Davos, and interestingly, I've got a contact colleague over in Davos this week, and he said, Davos is like a blockchain conference, right? Because that's the only thing they're talking about is blockchain and ICOs and Bitcoin, right? And apparently there's a session later on today, and I think the price volatility today is driven by I think actually Philip Hammond's come out this morning and said we need to put laws in place, we need to regulate this stuff, which I think is incredibly positive. In terms of the difference, I mean, in terms of what happens in across the pond, and presumably by that you mean the US. I mean, it's an interesting question. I'd be interested to understand why you say, why you raise that. For me, I don't see any geographic boundaries, if I'm honest, because the boundary only comes when it becomes a regulatory question, and whether it's a security or not. And actually, you're then into the territory. Well, actually, it's got utility, so it's not a security. But the only reason they start to exclude the US from a raise is because the SEC get very funny about it. Okay, but so I don't see any geographic boundary, and the projects, I see projects on a global basis, and they're all as exciting and adventurous and wonderful. And you've got people in Estonia working with people in the US, with people in South Korea, and people in Japan, all virtually coming together.
What I meant by that was just the assumption that potentially the market could be a little bit more saturated in the States and things could be a little bit more fresh over here. So perhaps there are still more opportunities.
That's interesting. I think I would suggest, I think it could be very concentrated here in the UK, and I think we've got such a vibrant entrepreneurial community here. I don't think we've even grasped that what ICOs can do in terms of changing business models and actually bootstrapping some of these wonderful projects up. So I think I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Is there another question? If you could bring the mic forward, thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for everyone's presentation today. I was really inspired and I'm really eager to learn more about all of this. So probably just this kind of general question for everyone. So what's the biggest challenges like each one of you facing right now? And usually when you face to any challenges, then what's the first action you guys take?
Right, I think.
Getting paid.
Yeah.
Very simple. I mean, I'm very publicly open about this. I think it's disgusting the way big corporations treat SMEs, right? And so I'm owed several multiples of £1,000 from one organisation. They've not paid me. Okay, it's 3 months overdue. What value does that add? Right? Puts me under pressure. They don't care. So we had a very stern conversation yesterday morning about pay me. Right? It's very simple, but it doesn't add any value and it erodes trust. So I think getting paid is a core requirement in the short term. Anything else? I mean, I think just for me more generally, and I was talking to Joe about this just before, was I think I need to, as an organisation, we now need to scale. We've got lots of fingers in lots of pies, and actually it was a learning from earlier. I need to go and bring some more people in to actually help me out in terms of making this bigger, because we need so scaling for me is I think one of the most immediate challenges I face.
So just on the payment side, the oil company that I worked for every day we could extend our creditor payment terms, we would make $1 million a year more. just in interest because it was such a high volume cash business. So there is no value in terms of the relationship, but there's a pounds and pence value in organisations, which is why they would prefer 90 days. Because yeah, for my £5,000 invoice, it's really nothing, but you magnify that across the whole organisation. And what you're looking at there is a reflection of the whole kind of systemic problems that you have in large organisations. Do you want really good suppliers that would go out of their way because you pay them on time? Or do you want to squeeze that supplier, create mistrust, and actually, if you look at the overall value in terms of the tangible and the intangible, do your company harm by paying them on late payment terms? So that's the kind of payoff, but it's very easy to identify pounds and pence. It's much, much more difficult to identify the benefits of good relationships. So yeah, just on that point, I think you're absolutely right.
I'd just like to add and build on that. I think this is going to change because I think legacy banks obviously are part of this problem big time. I mean, I had a payment that was stopped I was paid by Hong Kong in dollars to Bank of America that came to Lloyds. I wasn't told by Lloyds, but my payment had been stopped and held up in the Bank of America. And my client...
For AML reasons, or...?
They wouldn't tell me. I'm not, as part of ripitup, I'm not allowed to know why my money's been held up. The client is ringing me saying, can you find out what the questions are that are being asked, because we don't know how to answer it. So of course I speak to my bank and say this, and they go, this is not protocol, that it's the World Bank, they should know that this is not protocol, it's nothing to do with you, it has everything to do with me. It's my money. And of course the first thing I did was phone Monzo to say, can we do international payments? Not yet, not ready, we haven't quite got it ready, because they're sitting making money on my invoice. That's what it's really about, isn't it? And so these, transactions, I think, I've got a question from the tweet about transactions with regards to, is blockchain and ICO, which one's making the other one more famous? Which one's actually, because it all comes back to transactions actually, because it's the amount of transactions. Banks aren't coping with the transactions, they aggregate their data, right? And that is a fundamental problem which we don't know about. And I think that the technology that's coming into place is going to increase the amount of transactions that can take place, hence these new regulations of transparency. The new startup companies are able to address this, but legacy banks have got so many problems with the software, with their technologies, with everything else, and it's basically an upside-down pyramid spinning badly. So that's something, sorry, I've interrupted.
That's okay. So my challenge personally with TouchPaper is A, it's a massive undertaking, and B, I have a day job. TouchPaper, apart from the original money that I got to do the research and launch the project, there's no resources in terms of my time or money to move it forward. So at the moment I'm working with a lot of corporates to understand and how I can perfect the toolkit, but I really need kind of more time and resources to move that from the kind of not-for-profit where it is into a standard. So that's my challenge. And to Hayden's point of networking, that's the approach I'm taking. The more people you can speak to and raise awareness, the more kind of momentum it should gather, and some of those answers should start to appear.
For me, it's a kind of, I guess, making sure that myself and the whole team are working on the most important things. They can have the biggest impact fastest. So I always think about it as like, I don't know, some sort of diagram where if you're a company that does the right things, like at the right point, you go a lot faster, right? So we have internal debates about, like, if something takes 5 days more, but like if you extrapolate any task that you do that takes 5 days more, like you might be a year down the road and the other guy's already there. So working on the right things first is massive.
You just kind of stole my one there a little bit.
Sorry.
My biggest challenge at the moment is time. It sounds simple, but time management. Like, I've just left the NHS where you kind of leave work at 5 o'clock and it's great. I go home. Trying to fit everything in is the hardest thing. So I actually, for the first time, bought like a year business goal planner, which seems a bit rubbish, but actually, when you set your goals down and then you chunk them down into months, and then you put the ones that are going to make you financially free, which are going to grow you personally, and are going to take you towards your 10-year goal, it's much easier to determine on a day-to-day basis what you're going to do. So every day I put my 3 musts that will drive me for personal development, financial development, and my own end goal, and it then structures your day. And someone taught me something with regards to emails, is do emails in batches, okay? Never have them open live streaming into your account, you may know this, but do an hour's emails and that batch is done, okay? Because otherwise you spend so much time filtering back and forward chat, but actually if you just check tomorrow, that's already solved and you didn't even need to waste any time on that. So someone talked about emails about thinking about your clothes closet, okay? If you've just had a spring clean and you've cleaned out all the things in your clothes closet and it's looking really nice, when you close those closet doors, it just fills in with everyone else's rubbish, okay? Don't keep opening up and seeing other people's rubbish, okay? Leave your closet clean, don't check your emails. I don't kind of know how that one works actually, but
I don't read emails
I think
for
I got
2
that
days,
a bit wrong.
For 2 days sometimes.
2 days, yeah.
Just
Batch it. Batch your emails. That's key.
Yeah, I think I think actually emails are an interesting one. The challenge. I mean, so in my previous jobs, I mean, I would get sort of 300 emails a day. What was interesting though is because if you're effective within an organisation, actually, I used to find I knew what pretty much every single one was about. Okay, and I think that's a measure of effectiveness of you as a leader and a manager within your own organisation. I think email is complete rubbish. Yeah. Right. I'm sorry. I know Microsoft, and there's actually Lotus. You've got Lotus Notes out there as well. And
they've got Team now.
Yeah.
Emails. Team in
And
Microsoft.
the challenge. It's an interesting. I mean, it's an interesting point because you then extend this. So I now start to. You work with lots of other different teams. Slack. We've got Discord. Right. You've got email. We've got WhatsApp. We've got SMS. And it kind of LinkedIn as well. And I get these random sort of people on LinkedIn who want to have an appointment with me and they want to do it through LinkedIn. And I'm going, all right, but that gives me another thing I've got to coordinate through. So if it matters, people will find you, right? If it's important, people will find you. So, I mean, the rubbish emails people, right? It's just pages of rubbish, right? And there's a wonderful thing called Parkinson's Law. Has anybody heard of Parkinson's Law?
Page 20.
Well, that's
Pareto.
So what happens in Parkinson's Law is that work expands to fill available time. So basically, people people will find stuff to do within their organisation because they've run out of what they've got to do, and they fill that gap with creating noise across organisations. Email is. I just don't do it. Right. Find the most efficient way.
Has anybody heard of Team, Microsoft? It's a new kind of, it's not Slack, but it's certainly going towards, you can invite groups and run projects through. You heard
it's
it?
project management system.
It's really good. I came across it yesterday actually at the conference. Is there one question? Yes. Yeah? And we're going to have one more question and then we're going to have to close, I'm afraid.
Hi, my name is Steve Kelsey. It's a question for Victor, but first of all, thank you very much indeed for the presentations today. I always find these events, there's always 3 or 4 nuggets that really set my mind spinning, and Victor, you deliver one today. When we were talking about the ability to nudge people from credit into saving, so instead of borrowing money or having to service debt, move them into actually saving money. With the entire Western consumer world built around debt and credit, if you achieve your goal, that for me redefines disruptive and transformational. I'd just like to ask you, or ask the panel, if they could just speculate a little bit on what they think that world might look like, because I'm having difficulty envisaging the scale of the impact. And just make it a simple question. In that environment, what would the existing creditors do? What would the banks do? What would the credit card companies do? What's going to happen to this huge financial infrastructure which exists to extract interest from consumers?
Yeah.
So, I mean, personally, I think credit will always be there, right? I just think it'll come at a much lower cost, and all of these people that are sitting on top of, or kind of controlling the flow of money, that are putting a taxation on it, right? That they're taking their fees, though their fees will be like massively reduced. But credit is good in the sense that the whole point of credit is you do something now that you would have to save up for like 10 years, right? So there's nothing wrong with credit, But I just think it'll become a more efficient, a cheaper system, and this taxation on the system that goes to banks and intermediaries will just go down. So I just think it'll become much more efficient. And people and some people get completely ripped off on credit, right? Because they have no alternatives, and hopefully that'll cease. That's how I see it.
Yeah, I would look at it in the same way that you've seen energy markets and mobile phones are moving to that world. It's almost like a democratization of that service. So if you look at some of the payday loan companies charging X thousands of %, that's not cool, right? And in any way or shape or form, that is not cool, right? So if there is a way that that person who probably is not particularly creditworthy can borrow that money in a much more sensible fashion through transparency and open data and a lot more, you will democratize that movement. And those payday lenders will either have to provide value for what they charge, more value than what they're currently providing, or it will kind of standardize the charges for payday loans to people that may be at risk of repaying it. So I think it will turn a lot of services into kind of dumb pipes, where the service will be so standardized that the margins will be the same margins that you see in energy markets.
The banks exist as frameworks, and the central banks exist as frameworks for people to safely store value, okay? And the idea of debt, and the economists will tell you the purpose of debt is to allow economies to grow, which is all positive, okay? So we're taking value from people that got it and moving it to people who haven't got it so that people can make money in between. The problem we've got is the banks introducing an enormous amount of frictional cost because they've got layers and layers of general ledgers and payment systems and lovely buildings in Canary Wharf that cost hundreds of millions of pounds a year to run and build, okay, without work. I think the opportunity with blockchain technologies and what it allows you to create are asset types, digital asset types that actually reflect the generation of real economic value. They become a store of value in of themselves. And what's more interesting is that you can get to a place where you actually swap those stores of value. So you're kind of in the territory of barter economics, right, for digital assets. Now that's very interesting because it means you don't need to go through existing monetary frameworks. No banks, no central banks. And that really questions the role of the bank. And then we then get to a place, well, how do you then, a purely digital tokenized economy, how do you let it grow? Well, there's going to be people that have digital value, digital assets, and lend it to other people that haven't got it, and that's how it grows. There are two boundaries there, okay? Where we are now and my sort of most extreme utopian view of where this could go. Will we get there? I think my wonderful story is 100 years ago, 125 years ago, Marconi invented radio, okay? So we removed cables and wires. Nobody really knew what to do with it. And actually it's a big bubble, right? 125, I mean, there's about, in this room now, there's probably about 500 transmitters and receivers that we don't know about, mobile phones, all that kind of stuff. This will be like the radio of technology. It removes wires, you see. And the funny thing about that was I raised Marconi a couple of weeks ago, another presentation, and somebody said, I thought you said Mark Carney. And I said, well, Marconi is responsible for many wonderful things, but radio is not one of them, unfortunately. But yeah, I think that's the way I perceive it.
Excellent. Are we okay for questions? Any more questions?
Did Lucy?
All I was going to say, from a non-financial person, the way I see it is that means that, like, if these guys are doing clever stuff to be able to make me come out of debt and save me money, I can spend more time doing the things that I want to do. So that's kind of how I would picture that, because I'm all about things like Plum, that I don't have time or want to spend time at night looking at my spreadsheets of where my money goes. And if you're going to do it for me, brilliant. So for the uneducated financial people, these sort of things mean that they can actually apply themselves in the skill set that they are designed and want to do.
It's not uneducated, you have better things to do.
Yeah, well, but also I don't want to get educated.
Exactly.
So to get to the level where I'm making those smart investments, I would have to invest time in educating myself to that level, and I don't want to do that. I want somebody else to do it.
Yeah. And on that note, segue nicely into the last thank of the day, goes to Seth Roden, great script writer, copywriter, who supports Ripitup massively and basically describes everything that we've done, talked about, etc., and things that even I moan about. And that's all on the blog, Ripitup, ripitup.co, sorry. And so he'll describe this whole day, you can look back on it. Please tweet, feedback, and let me know if you want to join the community. So thank you. very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lily.
Can we get a picture?
Yeah.
I'll give you a business card.
I'd like one for yes, for my partner.